It's time to make it, just give it a try. 'Cause you can make it like the old fat guy.
Welcome to today's episode of You Can Make It with David Farrell. I'm the old fat guy. Today I'm going to make one of the basics, beef stew. Everybody needs to know how to make a good beef stew because it is so rich and it is so hearty and it just makes you feel so good. But let's not forget where beef stew came from. It was a way to use up a cheaper cut of meat and to take one piece of meat and stretch it out over more people because it puts it in a good sauce with lots of vegetables. So to make beef stew is really quite simple. Let's get right into it. First thing I've got here is a pot on my induction cooker, and we're just going to turn it on and get it up to about 350. There we go. And we'll put in about a teaspoon and a half of olive oil and just heat it up until it's shimmering, which will just take a minute. The oil is starting to sputter a bit, get a little bit of smoke off of it, just getting a nice shimmer, and now I'm going to put my beef in. I have here about 750 grams or 1.5 pounds of cubed beef. I like to cube my beef about 3/4 of an inch, but you can do it bigger or smaller as you like. And we're just going to throw it in the oil, and there's a trick here. Do not do it all at once. You don't want any of those cubes touching, and you want to then brown it on all sides. So I'm just going to brown up the beef in about 3 different batches. If you put them all in at once, they give off a lot of moisture and you don't get good browning. So you can see these have only been in for a short second and already they're starting to get a good brown on them, but just leave them alone until they get a really good sear. We'll check them in a second. So I'm taking the first batch of beef out and putting it on a plate. You can see it's nicely browned on all sides. Got a good sear on it. And we're just going to add another teaspoon of olive oil and do the second batch. We have the last batch of the beef browned up, so we're just going to take it out and put it on our plate with the rest of the beef. And we're just going to dribble the last little bit of the olive oil in the pan. Just get it all in there. And we're going to add about 1/2 of a medium onion that's been sliced lengthwise. And we're going to cut the heat down in our pan to medium. And that's about 1.5 cups of sliced onion, and we're going to throw it in to the pot. And we'll just give it a stir around. You just want to get a bit of brown color, and that'll take a few minutes, so I'll be right back with you. You can see the onions just got a little bit of gold color coming onto it now. You're just looking at that little tanny gold color. And we're going to add in 1 cup of button mushrooms and 1 stalk of celery sliced on the bias. If the mushrooms are too big, cut them in half. Don't slice them, just cut them in chunks and throw those in. And you want to cook these until all the water comes off of the mushrooms rather, because mushrooms have a lot of water in them and you want to get that off. So I've just been cooking for a couple of minutes, and you'll see that there's not a lot of moisture coming off of the mushrooms anymore. They're starting to dry up. That's what you're looking for. And we're going to throw in 15 milliliters or 1 tablespoon of finely chopped garlic and cook for 1 minute with the garlic in. Okay, so we've cooked for a minute, And now I'm going to put in 1 cup of coarsely chopped tomatoes. You can use canned diced tomatoes. I just happen to have some fresh tomatoes on hand, so I peeled them and chopped them up nice and coarse. And you want to throw that into the pot and just stir it for a bit. Just get some of the liquid coming out of them. Now, you see all that dark stuff in the bottom starting to scrape up? That's a fond, and it's just a ton of flavor. But what we're going to do is add 900 milliliters of beef stock, or about 4 cups. So we've got a 250 milliliters of tomatoes, or a cup, and we got 900 milliliters, or just about 4 cups of beef broth that we've thrown in. Now we want to add a few herbs and seasonings. What I have here is 2 milliliters each of thyme and dried rosemary, and 1 bay leaf, and we'll toss that in. Make sure you remember to take that bay leaf out at the end. You don't want your guests biting down on a dry old bay leaf. And then we're going to add 1 can, 156 milliliters, or 5.5 ounces of tomato paste. Gives it a good, thick, rich texture. Go. And we're also going to add 25 milliliters of soy sauce and 25 milliliters of Worcestershire sauce. And we'll just give that a stir up. And you want to bring it to a boil. And while it's coming to a boil, you can go ahead and toss the meat back in. You can see that there's just some bubbles starting to come around, that it's on the boil. And what we're going to do now is we're going to lower the heat and just simmer it for about an hour. So we'll just cut the heat down. There we go. And you want to stir it about every 10 or 15 minutes for that hour. Just throw a lid on it and let it cook nice and slow. So our stew has been simmering for about an hour. We'll just stir it down a bit. I gave it a stir every 10 minutes or so just to make sure it didn't stick to the bottom. And now we want to thicken it. Now, normally when you thicken something, you make a roux. You mix some water and flour, some flour and fat, and you add the liquid. But when you're doing a boiled stew like this, you don't have to do that. Just take a fine sieve and put it in the stew so there's liquid in the sieve. And I'm taking 75 milliliters, or a third of a cup of flour, and I'm shaking it into that liquid. And then just take a whisk and whip it through the whisk. Let's keep going until it works its way through. And what it does is the sieve takes the lumps out. So just keep stirring it. And there we go. It's nicely thickened. I'll just get rid of this. So now that we got the beef stew thickened a bit, at this point you could just leave it. You could just let it simmer for another half hour to finish the beef off, and you'd be fine. But you can also add some additions at this point if you want to. You can put in some little carrot slices, or some baby Brussels sprouts, or in my case, I have 12 baby potatoes. You could also cut up 3 medium potatoes or 1 big potato, but just to put a bit of potatoes in, I'm putting 12 baby potatoes into the stew. And now we're going to let it cook for 30 minutes more. Now you want to stir it about every 5 minutes or so because it's thickened. And at the end of the 30 minutes, the potatoes should be done, the beef should be ultra tender, and we'll give it a try. So I'll see you in 30 minutes. Our steam simmered for about 30 minutes, and the purpose of that was to finish softening the beef and to get our vegetables to make sure they're nice and soft. So we'll just take one of the potatoes, make sure it's cooked by sticking a fork in it. Oh yeah, it's nice and tender. So our stew is done, except we have to adjust the seasonings. So what I'm going to do is just take a taste and see if it needs any salt and pepper. Oh yeah, I could use some salt, a little touch of salt, and a good grinding of pepper. And give it a stir. And we'll see how it tastes now with a clean spoon. Oh yeah, that's good. You can add more if you like, just keep adding it until it's the way you like, but that's good to my taste. So now let's do the best part of any of these videos, and that's tasting the result. So we'll just put some stew in a bowl. Doesn't that look creamy and rich? Wonderful sauce. And of course we have to give it a try, so we'll just get a little bit of meat and some of the sauce and give it a taste. Oh, that is so good. It's got a rich tomato background with lots of beef in the sauce. The onions give it a really rich flavor. The mushrooms have cooked out, which give it a great umami. This is an absolutely wonderful beef stew, and of course, the best part is you can make it.
In this episode, David made Old Fat Guy Beef Stew. The ingredients used were 15 milliliters of olive oil, 750 grams of beef, cubed, 250 milliliters of button mushrooms, 1/2 medium onion, sliced, 1 stalk of celery, sliced, 15 milliliters of garlic, finely chopped, 250 milliliters of diced tomato, 156 milliliters of tomato paste, 2 milliliters of dried thyme, 2 milliliters of dried rosemary, 1 bay leaf, 900 milliliters of beef stock, 25 milliliters of Worcestershire sauce, 25 milliliters of soy sauce, 75 milliliters of flour, 12 baby potatoes, and salt and pepper to taste. For the complete recipe, visit David's blog at oldfatguy.ca. And remember, you can make it. It's time to make it. Just give it a try. 'Cause you can make it like the old fat guy.
Thanks for joining this episode of You Can Make It. I'm David Farrell. Today I want to make something Canadian, a Canadian treat called butter tarts. And I love butter tarts. They're a brown sugar and butter filled tart that's ooey and gooey and oh so good. And the best part is they're also super easy to make. So let me show you how to make butter tarts. We're going to start off by putting an egg in a bowl. Just get that bowl up there and crack an egg into it. And then we just want to beat it a little bit with a fork, just get it broken up. And then to the egg, we're going to add 250 milliliters or 1 cup of brown sugar. And we're also going to add 75 milliliters or 1/3 cup of melted butter. The next ingredient that we're going to add, 125 milliliters of raisins. Now this can be a little controversial. Some people say you should never have raisins in a butter tart. Others people say you have to have raisins in a butter tart. Well, the higher powers told me that we like raisins in our butter tarts, so we're putting raisins in. So there we go, 1/2 cup or 125 milliliters of raisins. And then this is my own secret ingredient. You won't find this in most butter tart recipes, but I find it really smartens it up. Is 25 milliliters or 2 tablespoons of dark rum. Just gives it a little flavor. It doesn't really make it taste rummy, but it makes it very nice. And the last ingredient is 5 milliliters or 1 teaspoon of vanilla. Precisely. And then you just want to stir those together. And there's the filling for your butter tarts. Now, I'm just going to wipe my counter down here because I got a little bit of egg on it. You can make your own pastry, or you can do what I've done here, which is just go to the store and buy frozen pastry shells. What you're trying to do is get the right size that you like. You can make them in big ones, in muffin tins if you want, but you'll get fewer tarts. The standard tart shell you buy in a store, you should get about 12, maybe 15 if you're a little over the top. Now what you want to do is you want to fill these tarts about 2/3 full, because the filling will swell up in cooking. Now I also should point out, by the way, I've got my oven preheated to 450 degrees, because that's what we're going to start cooking them at. Okay, so just spoon in the filling into each butter tart. Remember, only 2/3 full. Okay, here's our last couple of butter tarts that we're going to fill up. And there we go. We have 12 butter tarts. I'm going to put these tarts in the 450 degree oven for 8 minutes. Then I'm going to reduce the temperature to 350 degrees and cook them for 15 to 20 minutes longer, just until they're set and the crust around the edge is nicely browned. So I put the butter tarts in the oven at 450 degrees for 8 minutes, and it took about 16 minutes for me to get a nice brown around the crust like you see here. The centers are nicely set. Whatever you do, do not eat them right away. That filling is like lava. When it comes out of the oven, it'll burn your lips badly. So these have sat for about 15 minutes just to make them a little safer to bite into, but it's the perfect time for my favorite part, trying one. So let's take one of the tarts, just pop it out of the container and give it a bite. That is a wonderful treat. You've got the caramely butterscotch flavor of the butter and the brown sugar. You don't really taste a lot of rum, but it gives it more complexity and a good taste. The raisins give some nice sweet. This is a fantastic tart, and of course, the best part always is you can make it.
In this episode, David made butter tarts. The ingredients used were 12 to 15 medium tart shells, 1 egg, 75 milliliters of melted butter, 250 milliliters of brown sugar, 25 milliliters of dark rum, 125 milliliters of raisins, and 5 milliliters of vanilla. For the complete recipe, visit David's blog at oldfatguy.ca. And remember, you can make it. It's time to make it. Just give it a try. 'Cause you can make it like the old fat guy.
Thanks for coming back to this episode of You Can Make It with David Farrell. Today, I'm going to do something that is so handy to have in your cooking repertoire, and that's how to make a gravy when you don't have any drippings from a roast or a chicken or whatever. The best part of gravy, a lot of the flavor comes from, if you cook a roast, brown dark bits get on the pan, juices come out of the roast, and that really is most of the flavor of gravy. But what do you do if you need some gravy and you haven't done a roast? What if you did it on a rotisserie with no drippings, or you're doing a steak, or you want to make some gravy for some meatballs or some other use? You have to be able to make a gravy without drippings. Now, I find that the packaged stuff and the canned gravies and that just don't have a lot of flavor. So what I do is I make my own gravy, but to give it some flavor, I add quite a bit of onion, and I make an onion gravy. And it gives a really rich, flavorful gravy without having to have any drippings. So let's get right into making some onion gravy. What I have here is half of a large onion, and I've peeled it, taken the root end off and the stem end off, and lengthwise, and now I'm just going to cut it into strips lengthwise. Now this looks like a lot of onion, but it's not. It's going to cook down a lot. You're looking for about 1.5 cups of sliced onion. So that's a little over 1 cup. We'll just give it a few more slices. And there we have 1.5 cups roughly of sliced onion. And the next thing we want to do to give the onion even more flavor is we want to cook it until it gets golden, because that adds a deep, rich flavor to the onion. So what I've got here is a pot that I'm just going to turn on my cooktop. And we'll get it set to a medium-high heat. There we go. And we're going to add 50 milliliters of vegetable oil to the pot. And we're going to add the 1.5 cups of sliced onions. And we're going to stir this continuously for 12 to 15 minutes until the onions start to get a little golden. So I'll see you then. So we've gone for about 12 minutes, and you can see that the onions got golden all around the edges, and that it has a nice brown color. You're not looking to get it dark brown. You don't want any dark brown bits. You just want that golden color starting to come. And that is when it is perfect for the next step, which is to add some flour to make a roux. So we have 50 milliliters of oil in there, so we're going to add 50 milliliters of all-purpose flour. And we're just going to sprinkle it over the pan and stir it in. Stir it into the... just like that, so it coats all the onions. There we go. And when you've got that done, you're going to add 500 milliliters or 2 cups of beef stock. Now, just pour it in slowly. Now, you can use homemade beef stock. You can buy this stuff in a can that you add water to. You can get the cartons of beef stock. Get whatever's convenient to you, and just add it to the flour and onions and stir it in. We're also going to add, just for a bit of body, 15 milliliters or 1 tablespoon of soy sauce and 5 milliliters or a teaspoon of Worcester sauce. And now that we've got all the liquids in, we're just going to stir this over heat for a few minutes until it thickens up. As you can see, it's a beautiful color. We just need the flour to do its job to thicken it up. The gravy's been cooking for about 5 minutes, and you can see that it's gotten to be a nice thick gravy consistency. The flour's thickened up perfectly. So now we can turn the heat off, and we just want to adjust the seasonings. So just take a spoon and have a little taste. Oh, is that delicious? Now I find it usually has lots of salt for me by the time you put the soy sauce and the commercial beef stock and the Worcester in, but this could use a bit of pepper. So I'm just going to give it a quick grate of pepper, maybe half a teaspoon or so, maybe a 1/4 teaspoon, we'll see. And we'll stir that in. And we'll get a clean spoon and give it another taste. Well, that's perfect. That's a delicious gravy. So let's just see how it pours. So we'll move this over and take the beef stock container so you can see it. And we'll just pour the gravy into it. And look at the wonderful consistency. Lots of onions floating around in it. Absolutely a perfect gravy. And now let's taste it with a bit of onion. So just get a clean spoon again. And get a bit of the piece of onion because that adds to it. It is such a rich flavor, nobody will know that you didn't actually cook a big expensive roast. You'll have a beautiful onion gravy, and of course, you can make it.
In this episode, David made onion gravy. The ingredients used were 375 milliliters of sliced onion, 50 milliliters of vegetable oil, 50 milliliters of flour, 500 milliliters of beef broth, 15 milliliters of soy sauce, 5 milliliters of Worcestershire sauce, and salt and pepper to taste. For the complete recipe, visit David's blog at oldfatguy.ca. As David would say, you can make it.